Hello there ladies and gentlemen, TX141 here, also known as Paul, bringing you another Ace in the Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's instalment I shall be reviewing the Ki-45 Co. To give you a brief historical overview of the Ki-45 and the iteration depicted here in War Thunder, the Ki-45 was an Imperial Japanese armed Air Force fighter, in particular a heavy fighter, which saw its design originate in 1937. It was the response of the Kawasaki Aircraft Design Bureau to the Japanese requirement for a heavy fighter with the arrival of Western heavy fighters such as the Messerschmitt 110 in the latter half of the 1930s. With the design originating in December of 1937, it was refined and sent into a prototype as of 1938, with the first prototype being introduced to test flights as of January 1939. The prototype was powered by a pair of Ha-20 engines, providing 820 horsepower. These were found to underperform and indeed be very unreliable, meaning that the design was well below the specifications and had to be taken back to the drawing board. The Kawasaki Design Bureau spent the whole of 1939 and 1940 upgrading the plane, switching out the two engines for a pair of Mitsubishi Ha-102 engines, which provided 1080 horsepower each. In doing this, the plane's performance was upgraded massively, and some additional refinements meant that with the new prototype engaging its test flights as of May 1941, the plane could now live up to the expectations set for it. Ergo, the plane was rolled into the assembly line as of October 1941, and introduced to combat service as of February 1942. The plane was to see its most prominent service originally as a long-range escort, with most notable service being in the battle for Guilin as of June 1942. Additional battles such as that one depicted the Ki-45 Co, most likely because that was the first variant introduced, as being a plane which was insufficient when going up against the American monoplane, the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. As a result, the Ki-45 could not be scrapped because it was a good design in its own right, but its role had to be changed significantly. As a result, over the course of the rest of 1942 and 1943, the plane was to switch from standard interceptor role to the role of ground attack, naval attack and bomber interceptor, with the armament being increased in order to fulfill these roles where necessary. The Ki-45 was to see roughly 1,700 of its type, in terms of all variants, being produced throughout the Second World War, and the Dragon Slayer goes down as a plane, in general, which did fulfill a significant role. However, it was not a plane which could actually match up to any of the American monoplane fighter types in particular. The variant you see here, the Co, was the first variant, or the Mark A variant, which saw its introduction, of course, to service as of 1942. The plane was outfitted with a pair of 12.7mm machine guns and one 20mm cannon. The two 12.7mm machine guns were mounted in the nose, and the 20mm cannon was mounted underneath, firing directly from the sort of nose arch. As a result, all the armament was concentrated in the nose. The rear gunner fired a 7.92mm machine gun, which was deemed adequate for the time of heavy fighters being introduced to service. With our historical overview out of the way, how exactly does the Ki-45 Co perform in War Thunder? Well, I'm going to be honest, this plane for me has been an absolute nightmare. Now, we managed to kill that lag-free 8 very easily. However, as you may have noticed on that attacking run of that swordfish earlier, we did no damage whatsoever, despite the fact we scored a number of 12.7mm hits and hits with our 20mm cannon. And you're going to find, in my opinion at the moment, unless there is a new patch as of this review which changes this factor massively, that the guns on the Ki-45 Co have a sort of hit and miss strategy. Sometimes you'll hit a target and manage to hit them on the wings and it'll rip the wing off completely. Other times, you're going to have to hope for a pilot kill in order to make the most of your armament. Still, negatives aside, the armament is very well concentrated towards a nose cone, and therefore it means that it is rather accurate, and can be on target quite easily. We've made a number of quick passes thus far on a number of enemy fighter types, including the Spitfire, a Hurricane Mark II, and such forth, and I'm now going to go into the armament I'm using, in terms of the belts. For my 12.7s I am using stealth ammunition, simply because this one has a number of IAI rounds, intermediate adjustment incendiaries, which are good at setting planes on fire, where possible. And additionally the stealth belt means I'm not going to give away my position if I decide just to spray with the machine guns from the start. We then move on to our 20mm cannon, whereby I'm firing omni-purpose ammunition because I feel that the cannon is the main sort of break or take argument for the armament of the plane. If you cannot hit the enemy target with your 20mm cannon, then you are unlikely to do sufficient damage in a small window of opportunity. The omni-purpose belt has tracers but also a number of high explosive rounds plus one armour piercing round, meaning the majority of the armament going out will hit the target to do maximum damage, bar the armour piercing round. And then we move on to the rear turret. I'm using the APT rounds because of the tracers, and much like with my Messerschmitt 110 review, the rear turret does very little than to other tell me that I've got a fighter on my tail. As a result, I'm never expecting to get any kills with the rear gunner, just to be able to shake off foes and perhaps grab or glean an assist when and where appropriate. The convergence I'm using is a 500 metre convergence due to the concentration of the armament in the nose, and a 45-minute fuel load, as this is the minimum and well above the 30-minute specification that I like to fly out with. We're on the ground strike map Caucasus, and I am now diving on a BF-110C4 who is rather oblivious to my presence and going for a friendly base. I'm opening fire at long range and scoring a number of hits but nothing decisive due to the BF-110's overall durability. And having dropped their bombs, I managed to land a couple of 20mm shells on their right wing, taking it cleanly off, once again depicting the overall unreliable nature of the armament, whereby you're going to have to hit very specific points in order to do significant damage. I have heard rumours that 7.7s at the moment are the most effective armament in the game, simply because there seems to be a discrepancy of the overall power of armaments and calibers. However, I'm not going to discuss that in this review. I'm instead going to focus on the plane and how this review can be applied not just to the patch we are in, but also to future patches. So now we move on to the positives of the Ki-45 Well, besides the armament's concentration in the nose and therefore its overall accuracy, what else is there to expect? As we climb up to attack this Spitfire Mark I, who's trying to overclimb us essentially, we hereby note that the Ki-45 has a brilliant climb rate for being a heavy fighter. By comparison with the BF-110, which I previously reviewed, and you may see that review in the top corner of your screen as displayed now, the Ki-45 can climb with most of the monoplanes it's going to face. Of course, if it bumps into a Messerschmitt 109 F4, which it can do on occasion due to its battle rating of 2.3 by comparison with the F1's rating, F1, the F1's rating of 3.0, the Ki-45 is able to climb with most of its monoplane counterparts and therefore pose a threat during the course of a game not only to enemy bombers up high but also to enemy fighters that are trying to activate cruise control up high. As we chase after the Mark I that dived away from us following our climb and tried to ignore our overreaching presence, we also know that the Ki-45 manoeuvres rather well, so long as you have speed. Now, by comparison with the Messerschmitt 110, the overall nature of manoeuvrability of the Ki-45 is very limited. The problem with this plane is the faster you go, the better it performs, bar exceeding a certain overspeed, and I say that as we achieve our third kill. Usually I like to engage an opponent at roughly a speed of 400 to 500 km an hour. If you start pressing onwards from 650 km an hour, your roll rate begins to lock up. However, it is not a quick lock up, and as a result you retain, I would say, 75% of your overall manoeuvrability. On the contrary, if you drop below a speed of 350 km an hour, this plane begins to subside its manoeuvrability rather quickly, and by the time you hit 250 km an hour, you are flying, in essence, a brick. This plane can keep turning with most of its foes, and I've had a number of times when I've been at low speed, up against, say, a Lag-3 or an F6F Hellcat, and we've both been turning quite equally, simply because we're both at low speed and therefore we cannot activate our overall manoeuvrability with speed. Therefore, the problem with the Ki-45 is, to turn fight with anyone, you've got to be going fast. However, due to the unreliability of your armament, it means that that first turn, which may bring you onto target, may not necessitate you actually getting the kill, but rather an assist, because you will have to break off after one or two, at the maximum, successive turns. We therefore indicate that the Ki-45 is a plane which needs to avoid turn fighting where possible unless it can drag a foe off to the edge of the map, because in addition to your overall lack of turning ability and manoeuvrability at low speed, you also have a lack of acceleration at lower speeds. I find it rather difficult to get back from 200 km/h to 300 by comparison with a number of monoplane contemporaries. Indeed, I-16s, which I've had to dogfight on a number of occasions, pick up their speed so quickly it's almost impossible to break away from them at low speed. However, this also extends to a number of monoplane types, including, but not limited to, Spitfire Mark 1s, Messerschmitt 109 ML1s and other planes of that calibre. We dove down on a BB-1, I would assume we killed their pilot or forced them to crash into the ground, achieving our 4th kill despite the lack of a critical indicator, and as we brake around once again at a speed of 490 km/h descending to 465, we see that we turn very quickly and we can re-engage. We therefore move on to one final aspect of the overall good nature of the Ki-45 Co, and that is its overall performance in the boom and zoom category. I've already stated that the manoeuvrability of the plane is decent even at high speeds where it experiences a roll rate lockup. However, at high speeds the controls do not feel sluggish. We took out that lag-free 11 quite nicely at a speed of roughly 500 km/h, and we're now braking onto a Hurricane Mark 1 to do a small bit of damage before braking off to avoid friendly fire and encroaching on a kill steal. However, I digress. We return to our point, the fact that because of the plane's overall performance at speed and its ability to retain performance with speed, you can boom and zoom quite effectively. On top of this, you have a roll rate which is actually quite comparable with planes such as the Spitfire Mark 1 and the Messerschmitt 109 ML1 at moderate speed, and as a result you can change your direction quite nicely and tag along with foes who try to evade you by making sharp turns or just moving from side to side. You have the ability to turn fight, as I've said, but with a one-on-one engagement over a very short time frame, and as a result you're always going to have to manage your speed more effectively than the number of the Japanese monoplanes you've already flown in order to make the most of the Ki-45. Excuse me. From there we move on to the weaknesses. Now, I've already said that the plane suffers in the turn fighting category at lower speeds, and therefore the longer it is in a turn fight or indeed a furball, the more exposed this plane is. On top of this, this plane has very little armour in my opinion. Now, I know historically there was a small bit of armour, especially around the cockpit and the rear seat. However, the Ki-45 Co has lacklustre armour by comparison with a number of its contemporaries at its battle rating, especially say the Messerschmitt 110C4. And as a result, this means that you cannot take successive hits. On a number of occasions I have pursued an enemy bomber such as even a Blenheim or a Beaufort, and one hit from their gunners has either knocked out my pilot or has actually set my wing on fire, and this is a fire which will not extinguish itself. As a result, you have to be very careful about getting hit, and I say that as I achieve a nice clean kill on an F2A Buffalo to make my 6th kill, before pursuing an SU-2 MV5 which is just gliding off towards a friendly base. Returning to our point, because of your lacklustre durability, you're going to have to be very wary of the fact that when someone pursues you, they may actually try opening up at you at very long distances, such as that Hurricane did earlier, whereby they opened fire at me at 0.8 km, trying to score a season of hits in order to take off a wing. Additionally, the gunner is quite exposed, and do not be surprised if you lose your gunner even if he or she has a very high vitality, simply because they are in an exposed position. So, on top of durability, you also have the problem of the overall durability of the manoeuvrability. Now, this sounds as though I'm repeating myself and trying to bring in a bit of rhyme and slang, but to put it in context, essentially if you take hits to the aileron tabs, they will come off very easily, and I've found that on a number of occasions whereby I've lost both aileron tabs in one hit from someone's 20mm cannons to my wings. However, with that being said and the game over, it's time to review some stats. So, we conclude by noting that our 7 kills and 2 assists netted us 19,603 silver lions. On top of that, we earned 1,381 research points, and 1,795 research points went towards our research on the Ki-102. We recap our review of the Ki-45 Co by realising that it is a plane which is much different from the Messerschmitt 110. This plane cannot take the hit, and it is highly flammable. Additionally, the armament lacks the punch of the 110 and sometimes is very unreliable. The manoeuvrability of the plane is terrible at speeds of 250 km/h or less, and as a result you need to keep your speed up. However, if If you can keep your speed between 400 and 650 km an hour, you will do very well, and you will be in a heavy fighter which acts like most of the monoplanes you'll face. You'll be able to outturn a good portion of them and manoeuvre with them when and where necessary. As a result, this sets you up for a good turn fight ability in isolated one-on-ones with a number of passes, not exceeding 2 really, as you'll need to break away with your loss of speed. This also sets you up for the boom and zoo capacity, with your roll rate only starting to depreciate very gradually at speeds of 650 km an hour or more. The concentration of the armament in the nose cone means that you've got an accurate armament, and if you can bring it to bear on structural or control surfaces, you'll be able to take out your opponents with ease. We finally know that the rear gunner acts as a good warning device, and that the Ki-45 performs well at pretty much all altitudes. I've played this plane down low and up at an altitude of 7,000 metres to intercept a Heinkel 111, and I've noticed no change in performance, although I like to play this plane at 3,000 to 5,000 metres to both act as a bomber interceptor and a fighter killer when and where appropriate. We see by comparison the rest of our team that we came first, not by a huge margin, but because we played to the Co's overall strengths and tried to avoid any sticky situations, even with that questionable pass on the swordfish at the start of the game. As a result, if you're looking for a heavy fighter which respects the player who likes to avoid the massive engagements or indeed the furballs, and tries to preserve themselves by being in and out of the situation with their speed advantage intact, then the Ki-45 Co is the heavy fighter for you. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies!